Hello, good afternoon, and thank you all for joining our very first GNI Reader Revenue Workshop. My name is Arun Venkataraman, and I am with the Google News Initiative. Joining me, we have Pete Doucette from FTI Consulting, Nancy Lane from the Local Media Association, and Brian Connolly from Buffalo News. Today's workshop is a part of the GNI Digital Growth Program. The purpose of the program is to help small and mid-sized news organizations across the world build and grow their digital businesses. We focus on helping publishers be successful across 5 topics for now: growing and developing digital audiences, building and growing reader revenue streams, growing advertising revenue, improving data capabilities, and creating a product-focused culture. You can learn more about the program and find materials across each of these topics on the Google News Initiative website, and Malia from my team should have just pinged the link on the chat thread. Today, of course, we are focused on reader revenue. The content for this session and all the reader revenue material comes from the subject matter experts and industry associations you see here. Primarily, the learnings come from the GNI subscriptions and contributions labs conducted all across the world these past 2 years. I want to turn it over to Nancy Lane from Local Media Association to talk a little bit about their experience with the subscriptions lab and how focused attention on reader revenue can make a really big difference. But before I do, Malia from my team will have just pinged a Slido link to a set of polls on the chat. The password is GNIEN. Please feel free to answer those polls now, and we'll review the survey results throughout the session to learn a little bit more about the other workshop participants joining today. Nancy, turning it over to you.
Thanks, Arun. We are really excited to be part of the GNI Digital Growth Program. The Subs Lab was one of the best industry initiatives that I have personally been involved with. For nearly a year, we met with the 10 publishers in person, at their offices, in group meetings, on video calls, at conferences. Suffice to say, it was intense and a major time commitment for everyone involved. Working with FTI Consulting and the team from Google, we were able to significantly grow digital subscriptions across the board. We recently had a check-in meeting with the 10 publishers to track how they were doing in 2020. The lab ended in March of this year, but we had not been back in touch since that time. I'm thrilled to report that 5 out of the 10 publishers had digital subs revenue growth of 73% or more, with 2 showing growth of over 147%. These numbers are well above industry averages and on top of big increases in 2019. I truly believe that we can scale these learnings and help all of you attain these growth percentages. My advice would be to engage as much as possible during these workshops. Don't multitask. Ask questions. Take advantage of every learning opportunity that comes with this program. And feel free to use LMA as a resource as well. We're always here to help. And now I'll turn it back over to Arun.
Thank you, Nancy. It's been such a pleasure working with Nancy and her team, and a huge thank you to the LMA for making the Subscriptions Lab a success. Across all of our labs, we've learned that there is no one-size-fits-all solution for reader revenue. The journey for each news organization looks different. And since no one has a monopoly on the truth, and no one has all the answers, part of what we hope to enable today is the opportunity to learn from each other. I want to turn it over to Pete from FTI Consulting to talk a little bit more about how we hope to do that.
Hey, thanks, Arun. On the chat thread now, Malia will be sharing a link to a Slack group that we'll moderate over the next 10 weeks. The Slack channel is an opportunity to ask questions, share best practices, and learn from each other throughout the workshops.
Given that there's so much diversity here, as Nancy and Pete alluded to, and that news organizations are at different points in their reader revenue journey, we've designed the workshops to offer you a structured approach through the key strategic and tactical decisions necessary for growing your reader revenue business. At the end of the 10 weeks, we hope to leave your news organization with a holistic plan that makes sense for your long-term reader revenue journey. And I wanted to give you a quick sneak peek of that holistic plan we're building towards over these next 10 weeks. In our final workshop, Building a Long-Term Plan for Success, we'll walk through the planning exercise that you see here on this slide. We'll start by setting a long-term reader revenue goal that your news organization can galvanize around. Then, once we have that long-term reader revenue goal, we find that it oftentimes begins with understanding your reader revenue opportunity. So in our next workshop, we'll walk through an opportunity sizing exercise that will give a preliminary sense of your 1-year reader revenue opportunity. Is there a realistic annual goal that your news organization might be able to anchor against? And how does that translate into a long-term goal? Then we'll identify the target metrics that can help you reach that long-term reader revenue goal. They may be metrics you identify using the user funnel diagnostic that we'll talk through later on in the workshop series. The user funnel diagnostic that you see here will show how you compare to industry benchmarks informed by the actual performance of publishers in our subscriptions and contributions labs, and help identify the target metrics to focus on. Once we've identified a long-term reader revenue goal and target metrics, we'll identify the tactics that can help you achieve those target metrics. We'll offer a set of tactics we've seen used to improve performance against those specific metrics across all of our labs. And we'll also add tactics you've discovered during our value proposition exercises during our third workshop, developing and communicating your value proposition. And finally, we'll identify the investments and technology that can help you execute those tactics and the experiments you may need to run to validate whether tactics work. So in short, that's what we're building towards over these next 10 weeks: a clear strategy, actionable tactics, and a holistic vision for reader revenue growth that makes you and your news organization feel more confident about the journey ahead. And to help you feel as informed and confident as possible as you put that plan together, we'll share learnings and experiences of the partners and publishers that we've been privileged to work with. A reminder, if you want to start diving into the materials yourself, you can find the playbook and all these exercises on the GNI Digital Growth Program website. Malia's just pinged the link on the chat thread, so be sure to check those materials out. So let's get started. In today's session, we're going to focus on the 6 most important factors for achieving success in digital reader revenue, an essential starting point for our 10 weeks together. We'll also walk you through what you can expect over the next 9 weeks, including detail on upcoming workshop modules, panel discussions with experts. Reminder that we'll be answering a few questions at the end of today's session, so please feel free to add your questions throughout the session to the chat thread. We'll start with the best practices for achieving long-term success with reader revenue, which we've learned through conversations with publishers and experts around the world. First, deeply understanding your readers' needs. Second, building your value proposition around those needs. Third, communicating your reader revenue program simply and powerfully. Fourth, making it easy for readers to subscribe or contribute. Fifth, continuously strengthening your relationship with members. And finally, focusing your entire organization on a clearly defined reader revenue strategy. We asked a poll before, and I'm kind of curious to see if we were able to get some survey results on just the factors. Oh, there they are. So it looks like, looking at the polls, building your value proposition around your needs is the number one need. Focusing your entire organization on a clearly defined reader revenue strategy comes in second. These polls are changing in real time. Deeply understanding your readers' needs at third. Communicating your reader revenue program simply and powerfully, tied with making it easy for readers to subscribe or contribute, just pulled ahead. So the results are updating in real time, but I think what we see is building your value proposition around those needs comes in first as the factor that publishers, at least on this call right now, need the most helpful with. And I'm curious, Nance and Pete, does that feel similar to the news organizations you've worked with? And Brian, does that comport with your experience at the Buffalo News?
You know, I'll just say that one thing that surprised me in the lab was the make it easy for readers to subscribe or contribute. It was a huge issue, but the technology wasn't there. It wasn't a good user experience. Alan Fisco from the Seattle Times spoke at a conference a few months back, right before COVID hit, and he told the group when they started digital subscriptions, there were like 16 steps to check out. And that's not uncommon, right? To make it so hard that the user abandons the cart and doesn't finish the transaction. So while it may not rise to the top here, I would just throw out that it is a huge issue and one that you need to kind of confront early on in the process.
And I'll just add to that. If I were voting, I would have picked what is now number 3, was number 2 for quite a bit, is focus your entire organization on a clearly defined reader revenue strategy. To me, that's the big one and the one that publishers need the most help with. So I probably would have chose that. I mean, Brian, based on our work together, does that resonate for you?
I think so. Though I have to say that sometimes until you start diving into, different pieces of building a reader revenue program, you might not realize how important that organizational focus is. And you may also not realize that your organization lacks it. So I can see why some of these other things might be top of mind, but I think addressing some of the individual pieces that are important all come back to is your organization aligning along the reader revenue goal.
Yeah, and as we've seen the polls adopt, I think we find that publishers across the cohort need help across all these areas. And over the next 10 weeks, through our deep dive modules, we're going to focus on each one of these in more detail. The first factor we're going to explore now is deeply understanding your readers' needs. And building a strong reader revenue model begins with a firm understanding of your readers. The most sophisticated publishers we found use surveys, interviews, and focus groups to ground key decisions in reader feedback. The Membership Puzzle Project recently launched a membership guide, and there's this really great quote that I love. Without audience research, questions about who the audience is and what it wants tends to be answered based on hierarchy or power within your organization, or based on assumptions about who your audience is. That isn't good enough in an organization that is dependent on audience revenue and participation to survive and fulfill its mission. And I guess, I really love how this gets at the heart of why that nuanced, rich reader feedback is so important. Through our labs and engagements, we focused on 5 areas of reader feedback: product and content, willingness to pay, value-added benefits, marketing and positioning, and user experience. In our next deep dive workshop, Establishing Your Reader Revenue Foundations, we're going to discuss specific questions you can ask across each of these categories to get meaningful, rich feedback from partners. But I'll turn it over to Nancy now to share a few examples of how nuanced survey feedback can be really foundational for reader revenue success.
Yeah, I'll just say surveys were such an important part of the GNI Subs Lab. I'll share an example that came from the membership lab, the GNI membership lab. The Membership Puzzle Project worked with Dave Correspondent. It's a Dutch member-driven news organization, which has 54% of its revenue coming from memberships, so really successful. They used surveys and interviews to learn a few things. They learned that they could invite members to pay more in membership costs. They learned that readers liked it when editorial voices disagreed with each other. And they learned that readers wanted to hear them consistently and forcefully communicate their values. Surveys became so important to Day Correspondent that it made surveying members a regular part of its engagement. For example, new members are sent surveys about their expectations within 30 days of joining. Then they're surveyed about their experiences every quarter. I will say that we don't think local media companies in the US are using surveys enough, and they're such a valuable tool. And of course, if you use Google Surveys, it's free of charge, so there's no barrier to cost. We had 7 or 8 of the GNI Subs Lab participants using surveys, and the data proved to be really valuable. And Brian, I'd love for you to share how you guys use surveys and what you learned from that experience.
Sure. We did use the Google surveys at the very beginning of our participation in the subscription lab. And for starters, I think it gave us confidence that there was an opportunity there. We've had 17% of our respondents say they wanted a Buffalo News subscription but didn't have one. And and we were able to peel back the reasons why. We clearly were not communicating our value proposition well enough. We had some feedback that there was price sensitivity, so that led us into conversations about stepping up our introductory promotional pricing. And we also got to see which benefits, some of the benefits that we already offered, like unlimited access to all of our digital contents that they would want. So when we were crafting our messaging, we were able to take that feedback and make it much more prominent.
And Pete, some of the others really had success with the surveys. Anything you want to share there?
Yeah, no, I think I'll echo what Brian said about understanding like the audience with the willingness to subscribe was bigger than most publishers thought. And so I think that from my perspective was the biggest takeaway, what we learned in the Subs Lab. But I'm going to say equally as important was just how easy surveys were to use. So the publishers that put them on their website were able to get to the required number of respondents within a day or two. So you can get really rich kind of user feedback and insights very quickly. So it's easy to use. So I just would encourage everybody to use that as a tool in your toolkit.
In addition to understanding readers' self-reported needs, it's also important to analyze their current behaviors. So you can use News Consumer Insights, NCI, to understand current readers' behaviors, things like how they're getting to your website, how often they come, how long they visit, and levels of engagement. This data can also be an opportunity to understand if you have enough committed readers to create a meaningful digital reader revenue business. So for example, how many readers do you have who come to your properties more than 8 times a month? Assuming only 1 to 2% of them pay, is that enough to justify the time and investment you spend on building a reader revenue model? If the answer is no, your news organization may benefit from focusing on strengthening product and content and deepening engagement first, before building out your reader revenue model. I would just say that the NCI tools were extremely important in the Subs Lab in guiding the publishers towards their strategy. And Brian, I know you use these tools extensively. What would you like to share here? What did you learn?
Well, NCI comes, right at you with some very tangible things to change and to address on your sites. Some of them very simple things to do. Some of them a little bit tougher. Nancy, you alluded earlier to tackling the 16 steps that many of us have in the checkout flow. Clearly, that was something from that we addressed as a result of NCI. So that's everything from the color and shape of subscribe buttons to the offers presented on offer pages and how they're presented and what terminology we use there, how we're communicating our values through. That all came directly from News Consumer Insights, and we saw measurable increases in our checkout flow efficiency, how effectively we converted people into subscribers once we got them to our site, as a result of the changes that we made from the NCI deep dive that they did.
And Pete, what else would you add from the others in the Subs Lab?
Yeah, I'd say just quickly, using the NCI tool kind of identified the gaps in visit frequency for publishers. So, how do you get someone to become a casual reader, grow to a loyal reader, into a brand lover? And so the things that came out of that were identified, like newsletters, push alerts, browser notifications were great tools to influence kind of the visit behavior of your reader. So I think that's probably that really resonated with me.
I think back
Great,
to
thank
you, Arun.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks, Nancy. Thanks, Brian and Pete. And I just saw that there was a question on the Slack channel about the actual template with these questions. And just a quick nod, you can find all the questions that we've typically asked across our labs, or publishers have asked their readers across our labs, on the GNI Reader Revenue Playbook. But in addition, we will go through each of those categories and specific questions you should ask in our next workshop, establishing your reader revenue foundation. So more to come there. The next factor we're going to discuss is building your value proposition around readers' needs. So now that you have this nuanced, rich, deep understanding of your readers' needs, how can you build a value proposition around that new understanding? And it means oftentimes building a product that's focused on not simply meeting readers' needs, but also exceeding them. And at the root of that is creating strong, differentiated, original journalism. Before we touch on some tips for strengthening your product and content for reader revenue, I think it's important to have a clear sense of what type of reader revenue model might be a fit for your news organization. So is it contributions, a model where you don't restrict access to your core content, similar to The Guardian's or Texas Tribune's? Or is it subscriptions, where you require payment in exchange for access to your full content, like in the case of the New York Times or Financial Times? If we can, let's take a quick look at the survey results that we had from the poll we sent out earlier. Just kind of curious here. So it looks like about 56% are interested in subscriptions, 29% contributions, and 15% are still evaluating. Curious, Nancy, are these results surprising, or are they pretty much in line with what you're seeing across your membership in the LMA?
They're very much in line. Digital subscriptions are by far the most popular when it comes to reader revenue, but I would argue, based on the size and the level of investment that needs to be made, there's nothing wrong with a contribution/membership model either. So while everyone's jumping into digital subscriptions, I think by the end of the 10 weeks, you'll realize it does require a major commitment and a major investment. And I think the important thing is to be committed to reader revenue, no matter which option you choose.
And in our reader revenue playbook and during our third workshop, we're going to dig into some of the factors you should keep in mind when selecting contributions or subscriptions, so to really help you think through those two decisions. What we would recommend is whether you pick subscriptions or contributions, you should offer a membership program that helps your subscribers or contributors feel like they're a part of your news organization's online community. And what we've often seen is that the membership program, essentially the package of value-added benefits and communications that you offer either your subscribers or contributors, can really be helpful for deepening your relationship and a real important aspect of reinforcing the value proposition of your reader revenue model. Regardless of whether you pick subscriptions or contributions or how strong your memberships program is, a strong value proposition obviously begins with quality journalism that readers value. I really love this article. A year after launching a digital paywall for Wired magazine, Wired's editor-in-chief, Nick Thompson, published this really great piece reflecting on lessons learned and shared the list of articles that drove the most subscriptions during the first year of the paywall. And he was surprised to find that on the list were a lot of articles that didn't have significant readership. And it goes to show you how nuanced your understanding of why people subscribe needs to be, to really understand the levers you can push from a content and value proposition perspective. Understanding what content readers, particularly those most likely to subscribe or contribute, meaningfully engage with has been a focus for many of the news organizations we've worked with, building out their reader revenue models. And Pete, you mentioned on the Slack channel the other day a really great article from the Reuters Institute of Journalism, and I think maybe worth mentioning here.
Yeah, thanks, Arun. I think when you think about reader revenue, it's a bit of a mindset shift. And so I think that article talked about 8 European publishers who had embarked on their reader revenue journey. And what they, at a high level, it was, realizing that it's about quality versus quantity. And I think that's a really important message. And, connected to the Wired editor's article, you don't exactly know what specific articles are going to work, but thinking about, like when I was at the Boston Globe, we used to really think about what areas we could be the best in the world in, and really like doubling down on those areas. You're not going to know exactly what it means on every article, but thinking about where you can really make a difference and kind of win from a competitive perspective, where you can put your efforts, and you really focus on that quality and stop. If you don't have to chase page views, you can chase reader engagement, and you can chase impact. So I think it's a really interesting shift for publishers.
Great, thanks, Pete. I wanted to take a look at another change that this has meant for a lot of the publishers we've worked with in our Reader Revenue Lab. On this next slide, you'll see in Brazil, Stadao has invested in ambitious storytelling and formatting to really differentiate their content. And in the example here, they used this really beautiful interactive infographic to present the issue of childhood adoption in the country. And I know, Nancy, we've talked about a number of examples that you've seen in the United States. And I'm curious, Brian, how y'all approached it at the Buffalo News, the sort of shift towards more ambitious forms of storytelling to help support your reader revenue model.
Sure, it can start with just being very mindful of where the readers are consuming your news. So what we're seeing right now is an amazing display of non-conventional storytelling, very visual storytelling, but even just having a great mobile experience in general, making sure that you have great display of your photojournalism. But then, to Pete's point, when you're doing the more ambitious enterprising journalism, that isn't always an opportunity. And I think you see tons of publishers doing this really well to really show readers that this is something special through pages, storytelling pages that break out of the normal templates on your website. Some embedded interactives, of course, larger photos, opportunities to view source documents, and really it's just about adapting to what the readers want, but in a way that I think that every news organization can get super excited about, because of course these are all also great journalistic tools at our disposal that we didn't have access to years ago, and that we're getting access to better ones, and ones that even smaller news organizations can implement every single day. So being sort of standing ready for that, because I think there's lots of evidence that is what readers want.
Completely. And Nancy, I'm curious if there are any examples that come to mind for you.
I think the New York Times nailed it when they had their COVID interactive tools, right? You could go to any state, any county, see how many deaths, how many cases. I mean, I was looking at that on a regular basis all through March, April, May. I still look at it. And I think the crisis has really enabled media companies to improve their storytelling and be more interactive. And it's one of the reasons digital subscriptions are way up, right? Because the tools they've been better once the pandemic hit. It forced us to be better. So I throw New York Times out as the top example that comes to mind.
No, it's a great example. And in our second deep dive workshop, developing and communicating your value proposition, we're going to discuss some additional approaches publishers have used to strengthen content for reader revenue. On this next slide, you'll see how publishers have used metrics like average time spent per article and scroll depth, and how other publishers like the Financial Times have actually created their own metrics like quality reads. We'll also share analyses that publishers can perform, like the path to conversion analysis that you see here. Mather Economics, they conducted this analysis during our Latin American subscriptions lab, and it showed which articles were and which articles weren't on a subscriber's path to conversion. And they found that a majority of the articles produced across the cohort actually didn't show up on their subscribers' path to conversion, which led to some really fascinating takeaways for the cohort. So now that we've discussed deeply understanding your readers' needs and building your value proposition around those needs, the next factor we're going to walk through is communicating your reader revenue program simply and powerfully. This oftentimes means positioning, messaging and marketing your reader revenue program so that it's front and center for potential subscribers and contributors. In the GNI Contributions Lab, we worked with publishers in Latin America to develop messaging and marketing campaigns that really honed in on 4 principles. First, that reflects what readers value about the news organization. Second, that aligned with news organization's stated mission and values, that shared the tangible impact reporting had on the community, and then that emphasized what was different about the news organization from others. Nancy, I'm curious what effect marketing campaigns like the ones we've seen from the New York Times and the Washington Post, the effect that it's had on news organizations in the LMA, and the recent support local news campaign y'all ran comes to mind.
Yeah, I would just say it's really important to communicate the why, explain why readers need to pay for content. There was that Pew study that everybody quotes all the time that says the public doesn't understand the need to pay. They think media companies are doing great financially. They don't think about the cost associated with producing quality journalism. And so the onus is on us to educate the public. The Support Local News campaign, the $15 million campaign that Google ran, and we were a partner in that campaign. That was an attempt to do that, and that campaign ran for 6 to 8 weeks in hundreds and hundreds of newspapers, broadcasters, digital news sites. We really tried to get the message out there. Also, just add the importance of reporters being involved in communicating that message. And so Julie Brown at the Miami Herald is probably my favorite example. You know, she brought down Epstein, she's well known, and she is always communicating to readers. This is why you need to pay for journalism. It isn't free. It costs money, you know, and every time the Miami Herald pays legal fees to get a document that's been closed to the public open, she's out there front and center. And I feel like she alone has probably converted a ton of Miami Herald subscriptions. So when you have journalists like that on your team, they need to be part of this process. Brian, what else would you add from your perspective?
We've had success by putting our journalists front and center in our acquisition campaigns and all of our marketing efforts. When it's state season and important decisions are being made, 5 hours away in Albany, we put our full-time Albany correspondent front and center in our social advertising efforts. When we had a prominent congressman indicted, in large part due to the reporting that our newsroom did, we turned around a campaign right away that made the connection between journalism that readers had a chance to support through a subscription and the outcomes, in the democratic process. So, and we've gotten great response to all of that. I think, as an industry, sometimes we've been in the past historically a little bit shy about putting, touting our work or putting our journalists out in our marketing campaigns. And I think that we've found that not only is it effective, but it's important to do so.
Yeah, and Pete, what other examples come to mind?
Yeah, look, those 2 examples are really tough to compete with. So I think you guys, just echo what both you, Nancy, and Brian said. To me, the other thing that is a byproduct of communicating this and marketing it to readers is how it energizes the newsroom and the organization. So when we work with publishers that are doing this and doing this well, there's like a different level of energy within those organizations. So it matters for readers to get them on board and to convince them, but it also matters internally for the organization. So you're really about thinking about growth and not so much about managing decline. So I think it's a really important byproduct of committing to communicating this well. So back to you, Arun.
Yeah, no, those are fascinating insights, and I think just really speaks to all the possibilities in terms of how to creatively engage with your audience at the right moments and with the right message. I wanted to share 2 examples of some of the messaging that came out of the Latin American Contributions Lab. On the left, you see the call to action that Chronica will be launching. And it's been translated from Spanish, so hopefully not too much has been lost in translation. But we need the support of the people to put responsible original and unconditional journalism into practice. It's time to help each other. So really enforcing that sense of community, the values that the news organization embodies, and being upfront about those values with readers. And then on the right, you see El Litoral's new call to action. We build El Litoral together. We are a benchmark for quality and truth, a diversity of voices, incredible, accessible information. Be a part of the millions who trust our content. And in our Develop and Communicate Your Value Proposition workshop, we're going to discuss how these principles might play out in the context of your own news organization. So now we've gotten hopefully some understanding of deeply understanding your readers' needs, building your value proposition around those needs, and then communicating your reader revenue program simply and powerfully. The fourth factor for reader revenue success is making it as easy as possible for readers to subscribe or contribute. And as Nancy alluded to earlier, this was the factor that oftentimes was most important for publishers we worked with in our US subscriptions lab. And making it easy for readers to subscribe or contribute comes down to a cleanly defined and well-managed user funnel. Growing your readers, engaging your readers, converting those readers into subscribers or contributors, and then retaining those subscribers or contributors. As an organization, it's essential to make that journey as seamless and as easy as possible. And here's why that's important. Oftentimes we find that the average news organization needs to convert between 2 and 4% of their reader base to be successful. So to think about it slightly differently, oftentimes the difference between success and not success is converting an incremental 1 out of every 100 readers that come to your website. So every small thing you can do, every step you can take to reduce friction in the user journey can be critically important. And we've seen that play out with a number of the publishers we've worked with. I'll turn it over to Pete to talk a little bit more about optimizing the user funnel. Pete, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Arun. I mean, to your point, like small changes make a big impact. So in the Optimize the User Funnel deep dive, we're going to recommend the key metrics to focus on across each step of the funnel. In addition to explaining what they are, we're going to share kind of benchmarks that you can kind of target and then use to improve your performance. So going back to the quick poll, what metrics does your organization typically focus on? Here are the results. And it's a good distribution, but I have to say that this, and Brian's going to chuckle, I think, the top metric, average visits per user, is a really, really important metric. I almost thought it was a different one. That's why I was giving a big lead up, but I think that these conversion rate is definitely a critical one. And so it's interesting to see there's a really good distribution. I confused the first one with the last one because of the block on I was average reader revenue per user. That's the one near and dear to my heart. So throughout this program, hopefully we'll get people to focus on that as well. But Brian, any thoughts on this?
Well, I'm laughing because I think my answer before the subscription lab would have been pretty much the same order as we see up here now. And in part because, I definitely listen to everything that Pete tells me. I have to say that average revenue per user is at the top of my list right now and has risen to the top of the list of the Buffalo News. And the message there is first of all, all of this is which metrics to even be aware of and make sure you're measuring them. That goes back to that idea of the whole organization having the same North Star goals, which I just think is super important because so many other decisions, whether they're editorial or tech or marketing, or even advertising, they all have to flow out of that focus on reader revenue. But then on the revenue per user in particular, it's a little bit of the be not afraid to ask people for money and sometimes ask them for more money because you are delivering that and communicating that value proposition. It's going to work, and that was, I think, really what Pete preached to us, and he was right.
Thanks, Brian. So we saw a good survey kind of what people are thinking about in terms of metrics. So let's go to a kind of a case example about focusing on the metrics. And this example is from the Buffalo News. So trying to understand known users, newsletter subscriber rates, some of the key metrics. Brian, do you want to talk a little bit about your experience with the newsletter, kind of focusing on those metrics and then what you did to kind of improve them?
Sure. So we had newsletters for years at the Buffalo News, but around 2 years ago, understood better that it was more than just another way to deliver people the news, but was actually a really effective way to get people into the top of the funnel. So we were actively, we rebranded our morning headlines newsletter, Good Morning Buffalo. We had a moderator of it each morning, gave a voice to it, and really put quite a bit of effort into it. Saw some good growth, but very, it was a slow growth, I would say. But at the same time, we knew that it was we were getting great reaction from readers and even some industry accolades for the quality of the product. So we weren't really sure how to get that growth into overdrive. Some very simple tactics, including one that many of you have probably used and hopefully have had the same success we have. We put a modal on our homepage every 30 days. A visitor, if they did not sign up for the email, they would get this modal, and all they had to do was give us their email address or X out. They could X out. Most people gave us their email address. So we grew our list from around 11,000 to now we're well over 90,000 on this morning newsletters list. And what's really heartening is that even though, the way that we captured so many email addresses primarily was through people coming in to our site and seeing that modal. Maybe they just wanted to get rid of the modal and they didn't realize they could X out, and so they gave us their email and subscribe. We're getting huge engagement off of that. So really, it's people wanted it. They just didn't know that there was a way that people like the product. They love the product as a way of engaging with us. They didn't even know it was an option. So we're getting open rates in the 30% range, sometimes as high as 40%. And we continue now to see growth because people share the newsletter with friends, and that right now is our number 2 most effective way of converting non-subscribers into subscribers. It's because we use that list and we use that engagement to then send targeted offers to the newsletter audience. And we also find it to be very effective for retention of existing subscribers, because though the newsletter points to content that is not Buffalo News content, it is obviously very heavy on Buffalo News content. And so that makes sure that subscribers are seeing some of our best work and are engaging with it on a regular basis.
Thanks, Brian. So, great example about identifying the metrics, focusing on them, and putting things in place to kind of move the needle. So let's take a look at another quick example. I think this next one is from the Baltimore Sun and Tribune Publishing. And I think what they were trying to do was deal with readers that kind of abandon their cart in the checkout flow. And so they were trying to improve kind of their paid stop conversion rate and their pay flow efficiency. So what they created was this exit intent modal. So someone who's going to leave, they serve them this offer. And when I talked to my friend Daria Yushakova from Tribune, she said this is their best subscription asset in terms of converting people. So it's kind of understanding those metrics. I think that's the point, and trying different things and putting them in place to try and make a difference. So we'll discuss more examples of these key metrics throughout the program, but we just wanted to share a couple of examples with you. And then so kind of wrapping up session 4, we're going to move now to the 5th factor, which is continuously strengthening your relationship with members. So it's not enough to just get someone in the door. You have to build a relationship with them. And so what I think publishers need to think about what it takes to build a strong and healthy relationship. So I think we have an example here um, from the membership program to create opportunities to kind of surprise and delight. So surprise and delight sounds a little bit marketing and a little bit like cheeky, but it's really like a critical kind of retention and engagement strategies. So this example is from El Espectador, and they sent out an email series called Why So Lost? And so this was a great way to kind of build engagement with those readers and to surprise them. And so what they saw with this program when they put in was they observed a 30% decrease in churn in its control group. So really powerful improvement. And then I think we'll just go through one other example, which is the Southeast Missourian. So they were really thinking about how do they drive subscriber engagement. So they tackled it through a kind of a formalized onboard campaign. So for the first 30 days, and a welcome message, newsletter opt-in, letter from the publisher, really went deep with that kind of onboarding process. Download their mobile app, thinking about the user from the kind of the getting them oriented on being a new subscriber. And what that led to was an 81% increase in overall digital subscription. So, I think those are just two really good examples of surprise and delight, focus on onboarding, build and nurture that relationship with your subscribers. So very critical as you're thinking about your overall reader revenue business. So I'll flip it back to you, Arun.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. And we've mentioned this before, but a strong membership program can also be a really powerful way to not just attract the potential subscribers and contributors, but also retain them. And it can be a really powerful way to also connect with your subscribers and contributors, or even have them connect with each other, which can also be crucial to deepening and strengthening that bond. Our sixth and final practice for achieving digital reader revenue success is focusing your entire organization on a clearly defined reader revenue strategy. When we look at the New York Times or the Financial Times, a real galvanizing moment for their reader revenue business is when senior leadership came together, they set and communicated clear and ambitious reader revenue goals and made a series of strategic and operational decisions to orient the entire company around achieving those goals. So as we discussed at the beginning of today's session, we'll walk your news organization over these next 10 weeks through a series of exercises that hopefully leaves you with a holistic plan for your reader revenue model. And you see on this next slide, using our goal setting exercise, we'll bring together your reader revenue goal, your target metrics, your tactics, and the experiments that you might need to run to validate certain assumptions. We'll bring all those together into a holistic plan that can really energize your entire organization around reader revenue and make you feel more confident about the journey ahead. I'll turn it over to Pete to talk about how to structure and validate those experiments.
Yeah, thanks, Arun. So Arun talked a little bit about kind of the tactics. So what we'll do is we'll go into how to structure some of those experiments so you can understand what the impact will be. So we kind of mentioned at the beginning, there is no one size fits all model. But I think what is universal is building kind of that culture around experimentation, one that kind of creates and rewards experimentation. And it will ultimately will give you the ability to identify the tactics that work both for your organization and for your readers. So, sometimes we talk about experiments and A/B tests, and they can be a little bit intimidating when say, oh, you got to test all these different things. But they can also be pretty simple, and you can really go after a very specific insight. So this is an example from the Charleston Post and Courier. They were looking to understand the impact of unlocking an article with an email exchange. So the value exchange is give an email, read the article. So very specific. And what they learned through this experiment was they were able to capture hundreds of new emails that are used for marketing. And Brian kind of talked about the importance of that without impacting site traffic. So they really had a very targeted experiment, which is probably one of the key lessons. And they were able to generate a very good outcome. So I think those are just really some quick examples about thinking about how to structure experiments. But I'll flip it back to you, Arun.
Thanks, Pete. So to summarize, success in reader revenue comes down to a deep understanding of readers' information needs, building a strong value proposition focused on those needs, clearly and consistently communicating that value to your readers, making it as easy as possible for readers to become subscribers or contributors, nurturing those relationships over the long run, and then really building an organization that's ruthlessly focused and committed to those objectives at every level from the top of the organization throughout. And we'll return to these themes throughout our deep dive modules and bring them to life with real examples and real tactical recommendations that you can implement. I just wanted to end with a quick overview of the workshops to come. So in our next session on October 13th, establishing your reader revenue foundations, we're going to discuss sizing your reader revenue opportunity, which can really help determine that long-term reader revenue goal. We're going to talk about using surveys and interviews to understand readers' needs and using used consumer insights to understand your readers' current behaviors on your website. In our second deep dive, we'll share tips from news organizations across the world on using your journalism to grow your reader revenue model, how you select those value-added benefits for your membership program, and some tips on marketing and positioning your reader revenue model. In our third deep dive, Optimizing the User Funnel, on November 9th, we're going to share the key metrics, industry benchmarks, and tactics for improving across each step of the funnel that you see here. And we're going to use our user funnel diagnostic exercise, which you can find on the GNI website, to really identify areas of improvement. And then finally, on November 23rd, which feels like a very pretty far away, we're going to bring it all together, building out your holistic plan for reader revenue growth. In addition to that, over the course of the next couple of months, we're also going to be featuring experts and publishers across the world to share their learnings on building a successful reader revenue model. So our first expert session is coming up in 2 weeks. It's going to be focused on building best practices for best practices for building a subscriptions model in the U.S. and Canada, and then you see the other 3 sessions to follow in the coming weeks. Before we finish, I wanted to take some time. I know we have a few minutes left to answer some of the questions we've received throughout the session, and I'll turn this to you, Pete, Nancy, or Brian. For small newspapers, especially those in poorer regions that will never drive enough online traffic to make being an online newspaper viable, is reader revenue something that they can or should look at? And maybe I'll start with you, Pete.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Arun. So I think it's a great question. And I would say I understand that reader revenue may not look like a strategy that can make your small newspaper viable. It might not be the answer, but it might be part of the answer. It may be one of the building blocks that you build your ultimate long-term future around. So I think there are degrees on how much reader revenue can impact publishers, but I definitely have seen small publishers grow, significant amounts of ultimately digital audience, then digital subscribers, then digital revenue. But Nancy, Brian, I don't know if you have other thoughts.
We're really high on contribution models for smaller publishers tied to a membership model. I'll throw out the COVID-19 Local News Fund, which we implemented starting in late March, with 240 newspapers, raised 1.7 million. And for most of those news outlets that were involved, it was the first time they had ever asked for a contribution from the community. I'll throw out our number 2 on the leaderboard, the Houston Defender, raised over $110,000, an African-American newspaper in Houston, a small newspaper. So there is a real opportunity. If digital subscriptions are not the right model, and it's not for everyone, there are other avenues to reader revenue. And that's why I'm excited about these workshops, Arun, because you're really diving deep into all the opportunities here. Brian, you're pretty committed to digital subs. I think a paper of your size, you feel like that's the right strategy.
We do, though I would say, I think that for a lot of publishers, it's it probably will take a combination of revenue sources. So reader revenue as focus should not be confused with reader revenue exclusively. There's still a place for advertising revenue, an important place depending on the size of your organization. There's still opportunities developing. Nancy, as you pointed out, with contributions, you see lots of developments in terms of philanthropy. So, I think it's certainly the case that some publishers, and by the way, I think that Arun and the GNI team have built some really good tools for evaluating the opportunity. So a little plug there. But you can go on and sort of size in economic terms what the opportunity is for your news organization, and then figure out what the revenue mix is, because it's not going to be the same for everyone.
Great, thanks, Brian. And if you still do have any questions, just a reminder to please join our Slack channel. I've seen that a number of you during this call have already done that. FTI Consulting will be moderating that Slack channel in the coming weeks and couple of months. I just want to thank you all for trusting us to take you on this journey over the next 9 weeks. And apologies for the technical issues at the beginning, but we'll be sure to sort those out as we go forward. You are our first cohort of publishers as a part of the Digital Growth Program, so we expect there's lots of room for improvement. To the right of your video, you should see a prompt to be able to take our survey on how we can better help you as you embark on your reader revenue journey. And as a thank you, we'll randomly select 2 publishers who took our survey this week for an opportunity to have a 1-hour session with FTI Consulting to talk about their reader revenue business. Nancy, Pete, Brian, wondering if y'all have any last words of wisdom for our workshop participants today. Nancy, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, I'll say it one more time. This is not easy. It requires an investment. The Post and Courier has a newsroom of 90 in Charleston, South Carolina, and they have 6 people working on digital subscriptions, and they're doing really well. But it takes that level of investment to be at the top. So again, evaluate your situation and pick the model that's right for you.
Yeah, and then I'll just play on that, Nancy. I think that's a great example. It's not easy, and I like to say it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. But what I'd also say is, reader revenue can be learned, and so I guess that's the whole point of the Digital Growth Program is there's a lot of things that publishers can learn to take advantage of reader revenue as part of, or main part of their business model. So I'm very bullish that local publishers can build sustainable businesses using reader revenue at the center or part of that revenue mix. So I'm excited to be part of this journey. So Brian, I don't know if you've got any final thoughts.
I just say the exciting thing about reader revenue is that it puts quality journalism at the center of everything that you're doing as a publisher. And I think that, that excites organizations. It's excited our organization when you have the newsroom and marketing and technology teams working really closely together toward one common goal. I think the entire company, gets a lift from that. And the fact that the better the journalism, the better the outcomes, makes it something that I think, really, makes it just exciting is the only word I can come up with.
Well, thank you, Brian. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Pete. As all of you have mentioned, it is a journey, and hopefully over the course of the next 10 weeks, we can all feel a little bit more confident and comfortable about taking that journey wherever it leads. A huge thank you for everyone and their time today. We will pick it back up next week with our second workshop focused on establishing your reader revenue foundations. Till then, stay safe, stay healthy, and if there are any questions at all, please don't hesitate to ping us on the Slack thread. Thank you all.